A series of attacks related to the former head of the National Bank, Valeria Gontareva, took place over the last few months, which culminated in her Ukrainian house being burned down earlier this week. Valeria Gontareva herself currently lives and works in London, and she was also hit by a car in August. At the same time, Ukraine is witnessing the return to the spotlight and the growing influence of the prominent oligarch Igor Kolomoisky, whose former bank, private bank, was nationalized in December 2016. There are a number of the courts taking place. It will be interesting to see how the new government will deal with the notorious oligarch. Will it confront him or look for compromise? We also would like to explain the situation to our international audience, in particular those who are concerned, as we know that international organizations, for instance, those like EBRD, say that they remain vigilant over Ukraine's private bank case. And we have a brilliant panel in our studio to discuss the case. It includes Ivan Verstyuk, and journalist, political correspondent, who also following in details Ukrainian politics and the economics. Dmytro Natalukha, who is the MP from Servant of the People and is a chairman of the Economic Committee in the Ukrainian Parliament, and Sergey Fursa, a specialist of sales of debt securities at Dragon Capital, and also analyst explaining economy, active commentator of what's going on in Ukrainian politics and economy. So great to have you.
Thank you for having us.
Probably I should explain, maybe ask you, Ivan, if there would be, I don't know, a foreign expert or anybody would ask, like, I see all those sides. There is something with Gontareva house. There is a court. There is another small, tiny Kiev court which takes some decision on private bank. How would you explain what's going on? And of course, Mr. Kolomoisky is back and running around, giving huge amount of interviews.
From my point of view, what we are experiencing is quite a clear revenge of the pro-Kolomoisky stance in politics and also in some state-owned companies. When I saw him at the YES conference this last weekend, he was in a very cozy mood, talking to journalists and making sure everyone believes that he is feeling comfortable, that he has influence over president's office, that he has influence over Ukrainian politics. These are the messages that Kolomoisky wants to put into people's ears. And it's not a secret for anyone that Kolomoisky he clearly has a negative attitude to Gontareva, because she was the one who was standing behind the nationalization of Kolomoisky's bank, Privatbank, Ukraine's largest financial institution. This is pretty worrying, and when I was talking to a number of foreign diplomats from all over the world and asked them what they think about this revenge of Kolomoisky, what they think about the appearance of Kolomoisky during the YES conference, they were very concerned. We were saying, like, you're joking and making selfies with him, and this is the man who stole $5.5 billion from the taxpayers. So the problem is quite essential.
So, of course, there are this symbolic, not just symbolic, but there is a symbolic appearance of presence of Igor Kolomoisky. But, Dmytro, what would you say on, particularly on the economic committee work, and, how you gonna, more or less say that you're acting independently?
Me, myself, independently from Mr. Kolomoisky.
I would speak about the Servant of the People, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's not that we feel any kind of pressure from the Kolomoisky or whatsoever. I think that we should not underestimate the private bank case, but we shouldn't overestimate it as well. And the thing is that it's an internal dispute, of course. It attracts a lot of attention, but exclusively because Privatbank is a super company in terms of the monopoly, but also because Kolomoisky is a superstar. He has always been a trend maker and a newsmaker. And people feel themselves very interested about the news. So me, personally, I don't consider it to be a very global threat to the economy, because if we take the reforms right, If we take the laws that are being passed through the parliament, if we take concession, if we take privatization, if we take the new lease procedures, if we take the privatization of the space industry, we want to create a lot of checks and balances in order to not allow this kind of panic influence the voters. Because as far as I see it now, this issue is being over-dramatized. And I don't think it's rather fair, because from our stand, the servant of the people will do everything to keep quiet and calm down the voters and to guarantee the financial and economic stability of Ukraine.
We'll go into details that he...
Not details, but I would argue that, on my point of view, private bank now is a biggest risk factor for Ukraine economy, because Ukraine macroeconomic stability, economical growth that we have seen for the last 3 years is based on IMF program. And private bank nationalization was also part of IMF program. It was one of the best performing, if I could say that way, reforms that we have seen. It was very important, and all our creditors always figure out that it's very important to pass it through and go further. And when I mean going further, I mean that they expect that $5.5 billion to come back to Ukrainian taxpayers. And that's why this is just a compromise with, on the case of private bank, it's a red line. If Ukraine to cross this red line, it could be destroy IMF program. If IMF program to be destroyed, even take into account all these very good laws that now voting in Verkhovna Rada, really good. Especially from our side, we expect land reform, maybe it's most expected reform ever. But even if all these reforms to be done, if we put on the other hand destructive result of losing IMF, this all reforms wouldn't help. And what IMFs, and now that's why IMFs send these signals, State Department says these signals, EBRD sends these signals that, okay guys, we see, we're looking at you, we're looking forward for solution, but solution from our point of view, it's not some compromise with oligarch. And maybe the reason is because you can't moving forward, you can't do reforms, you can't reform your country dealing with oligarchs. Because when we're talking about what was one of the biggest problems in Ukraine, in the Ukrainian economy, it's oligarchization. And every reform pushing you to fight with oligarchs. Every reform. You can't do any reform without finding that there is a problem and on the other side there is some oligarch. So if you make a compromise with one of them, it's like compromise with devil. It's a deal with devil. It will destroy all reform agenda. And at the very beginning, it will destroy your macroeconomic stability because you're gonna lose IMF.
You say, you know, that it could be over-dramatized, but for investment, for having the trust into the new Ukrainian government, the symbolic things really matters. And for instance, apart from appearance of Mr. Kolomoisky, there are some clear things that, for instance, Dmytro Natalukha, the top manager of former Privat Bank, is a member of the cabinet. And there are a number of the things. So what you're going to do to show and demonstrate, for instance, that there is the fight against monopoly, there is something which really would help to investigate Mr. Kolomoisky instead of investigating, for instance, the deals of former head of National Bank Gontareva. We also know that concerns are because of having having in the Rada people close to Kolomoisky, like for instance MP Dmytro and people like that, who were voted as constituency representatives, but still are servant of the people, members of the faction.
Let us focus on the word compromise. And I want to be very clear on the fact that who is having this compromise with whom. As far as I know, as of today, neither Zelensky nor the cabinet of ministers are not holding any negotiations on the reprivatization of Privat Bank. So this is, of course, not a merely legal issue and a legal case. Again, as I said before, it has been provided with some added spotlight, but only because of the kind of the company which Privatbank is and the kind of the personality which Kolomoisky is. The other thing, which is also very important, is that we should be very careful on saying that we are vigilant about something and saying that we will be very carefully looking into what's happening, because that means that we want to be impartial and objective, aren't we? And if we want to stay impartial and objective, this is a legal case following the legal procedures, and we don't want any push or any stress on it. So for international companies, international institutions, whoever they are, and whichever impact on the Ukrainian economy they might have, I won't be sure that it's rather correct to kind of push the Ukrainian government into a certain direction in this case. If you trust us, if you trust the reboot of the Ukrainian system, of the Ukrainian Rada, of the Ukrainian cabinet of ministers, of the Ukrainian general prosecutor, and of the Ukrainian courts, we want you to stay impartial as well. And we want you to have this kind of legal investigations on all levels. This is the first point. The second point, in terms of the signals that we're having. Look, I don't quite remember the last time when Rada has been working on Friday and have been working until the very evening. I don't quite remember 29 laws being passed in 2 weeks, with the president tomorrow, no, the day after tomorrow probably, going to the states with those kind of laws. It's an incredible result, and it's an incredible signal that we are ready and we are going to that.
That's a signal, of course, and nobody wants to undermine the work of Rada. You're not just representing the whole Rada as well, but we are speaking about a peculiar case which can undermine all the good things.
Yes,
I guess
and what do I mean? When you're talking about compromise, it's not renationalization or privatization of Privatbank. Compromise, what Kolomoisky needed, he needed to solve his problem in London court. Because his assets is frozen now, because state looking to come take back their money. That's why state, Minfin, previous Minfin, Minister of Finance, with Privatbank, with National Bank, went to London court, and there, yes, when we're talking about London court, we say that we trust to this institution. But listen, people who are sitting in this room or who are watching, nobody is trusting to Ukrainian courts, nobody, and the trust is just a zero level. And I think even 400 MPs that sit in Rada, nobody trusts to Ukrainian courts. That's why, when we're talking about what we expect to see, we understand that the decision of Ukrainian court, it's not going to be the decision of some judge. Sorry, but not. It's going to be decision of presidential office. But it won't be translated from presidential office. We understand we will understand what decisions they make by this judge decision. And that's why everybody is talking about, and to Zelensky. That's everybody is trying to send a signal to Zelensky. That's why on Friday night, when IMF was on a meeting with Zelensky, they discussed Privatbank. Not because people were interested in, what do you think, what court decision should be made? No, they understand that in office, the decision going to be made in office of the president.
One important thing I want to add to what Sergey said is when I had a conversation with Kolomoisky last week, what I understood from what he said is that he needs money. He needs money now. His wealth is estimated at $1 billion, which is not that much in case you want to finance more political projects, in case you want to buy some asset from the privatization program that Ukraine's new prime minister announced. In case you need to buy political loyalty. For all these things, Kolomoisky needs money. And his claim to take $2 billion from the finance minister, from the government-owned Privatbank, is probably an invitation to negotiate the way who can get those money. But of course, his claim about this money doesn't stand to very basic fact-checking, because there was no any money in Privatbank when it was nationalized. That's a very important point. And I even asked Kolomoisky if he wants to buy any state-owned asset, which will be put up on privatization. He said he's considering those options, though from my experience of following Kolomoisky's activity, you know, in Ukraine, unfortunately, you don't need to own a property to make fortune on it. He can just install loyal top executives in a state-owned company like, say, Centrenergo or some else, and make money just like this.
With that, I agree absolutely. And we've been talking a lot of times about the thing that in Ukraine, all the state-owned enterprises, almost all of them, are already privatized as much as through top management. That's pretty much it. So in order to officially privatize them means just to formalize it. But what Sergey said, another thing, and it's very important, is de facto, he said that there is no judiciary in this country.
Yes, it's true.
I guess.
So the first point is that there is no legislation in the legislative branch in this country, because everybody says that the Rada does not decide itself. No. This is very, very important. And now we're hearing that the courts are absent, they're not autonomous, and basically it's not a decision of a judge, but of the office administration. Do you reckon this is the right signal you want to send to the diplomats and everything, that Ukraine is basically being managed and regulated by a single man in this country? Are we going back again to the Yanukovych time?
Oh, it's my question to you, because only one message I want to send is the truth. And the truth is there is no independent judgment in Ukraine. It's a truth, and we all know it. Why we should to send some not correct messages to our friends who support us for the last 5 years, just saying, keep and support us. We will negotiate somehow with oligarchs, but keep on sending money to us. Please support us.
Do not invest in Ukraine, because he considers there are no courts in this country. Thank you.
When we're talking about investors and what stops them from investing in Ukraine, we're always asking them, it's rule of law. 90% of investors tell us there is no rule of law in this country. So it's not a surprise even for investors.
And maybe it's not about like how you frame that, but rather whether there is a trust. You know, the trust something it's very easy to lose.
Where is the moment we start building it?
So do you believe in the Ukrainian court system, and that all the Ukrainian trials are fair, in particular on these economic cases?
I do give them a potential.
Let's stay on that.
Because that's the same thing you should ask about the parliament, the cabinet of ministers, any kind of central organs and authorities, which are still now under the government's control.
No, because you give credit to some new administration, new parliament. I could give credit to new parliament. But if you have old judgment system, why I will give credit to them? It's all the same old judges that behaved like crazy for the last 10 years or 20 years, who knows, and who stops our foreign investors, our foreign friends from investing in Ukraine. We all knew it. If we will form new judgment system, if we will pass judgment reform, I would be ready to give them a credit. In that case, yes, but currently, no way.
But then again, we go back, if we stay on this position, I can accept it, but then we should accept the following conspiracy theories, that out of 254 members of parliament from the Servant of the People party, half of them are either stupid or psychologically unstable, and another half are either bought by oligarchs, by Kolomoisky, by Firtash, by someone else. Then we have the Bogdan in the president's administration, who is super pro-Kolomoisky. And then where we're going far from, are we going far from that? Where are we going from that?
I do not see any connection between my point and point of piece of...
The question is really, you know, it's still the job probably of the party or somebody, you know, with the laws you're doing to prove that the system you're building is efficient and trusted. And there are, for instance, whether would you join to say what would be those laws and legislation that would be needed, that there won't be the preference to any oligarch in the country?
Yep.
Well, there are some just clear examples of how Kolomoisky is being treated specially by the government. Let's take the airlines, Ukrainian international airlines. It usually gets the best time spots at Borispol airport. No other company, whether even it's a big European carrier or small local low cost, can compete with Ukrainian international airlines. And this just one example. So I don't think Kolomoisky's influence on Ukraine's business scene and Ukraine's political scene is a conspiracy theory. Unfortunately, that's a reality we have to deal with. Though it's not a reason to say that Ukraine's not worth investing, that Ukraine has no hope, and it won't grow economically. It will. Even China, which is pretty corrupt, growth 6.5% a year. Well, Ukraine will grow, but it will grow much better and faster if people like Kolomoisky and other oligarchs would be demonopolized, de-oligarchized and put on a level playing field.
You have your point on that, and I agree with that absolutely. I mean, if you allow me.
Sure.
He is a monopolist. He is an oligarch. By no means I'm defending him. I'm just saying that there is this special case, which is basically a legal suit, which is not only on the Ukrainian level, but also on an international level. They have courts in England, if I'm not mistaken, and courts in other jurisdictions. And I just don't want us to overemphasize its importance. That's pretty much it.
I also should mention that while presenting the different sides, we should also would like to present the quote of Mr. Kolomoisky, in particular on those negotiations with the state about Privatbank, whether they are taking place.
I've only read about negotiations in the press. There aren't actually any negotiations or even any consultations going on. We aren't going to leave the new owner of Privatbank alone. We're interested in Privatbank, but if the regulatory process is difficult and causes turbulence in the financial markets, no big deal, we can discard it. Everything is for sale, and everything can be bought in business.
Still, apart from the economy, we have these cases like the Valeria Gontareva house being burned down earlier this week, which of course quite a concerning event. We also would like to give a word to show the quote of Valeria Gontareva. My colleague talked to her a bit earlier this week.
I suspect I know who did this, because it's been, you understand, more than a year, maybe, as he's been threatening me. So that's what I understand. Recently, Portnov joined him. I don't know the motive. I read today in the Financial Times that they're working on a settlement. I don't know how I would bother them in settling. I haven't worked for the central bank for 2.5 years. There have already been 1, 2, 3 incidents of revenge. Now today they've burned my house. My entire life was there. My family photographs. This was my house. All my friends have called me already. Zelensky called me as well. And the president's administration has sent out a press release calling for investigation.
And of course, Mr. Kolomoisky denies all the allegations. That's his quote.
I'm currently in talks with my lawyers. We're in the process of preparing a lawsuit. Of course, she's a Ukrainian citizen, so why should I chase her in the London courts?
So still, it's a very, very loud story. Of course, the president condemned, the Minister of Interior condemned. However, I've heard some of the comments of different MPs, including the servant of the people, who are saying, like, why the internationals are so bothered about this. What would you say on that? Because indeed, Valeria Gontareva is quite a top politician, a civil servant, used to be, but very, very much respected by the international partners.
I mean, it's a tragedy, obviously, and it's a crime, and it should be investigated. No doubts about it. So, and I think the president made it very much clear, as much as the Minister of the Interior. There are some suspicions, but they are alleged. Let's not forget about it, because she has been seeking for political asylum for quite a long time. And there are people who are trying to connect the dots, basically. And but that again, those are conspiracies. Either believe them or not. Let's wait until the result of the investigation. Until today, I think that all the prosecutional system, the police system, should be focused on this very special case, because it's a matter of the image of the whole country.
You were asking why it's so important, because when we see attack on a Gontareva, and people in this country do not like Gontareva, let's be honest, but at the same time she's very well respected among investment society, among banking society, and among our foreign investors and creditors. And how IMF see it, they do not see that it's just attack of some retired person. They see that it's attack on the independence of the national bank. It's very important, because what Gontareva did, she did a great job as a head of national bank. She did a great reform that when people ask him what are best performing reforms in Ukraine, banking system reform. And it is position not only about Sergey Fursa, but it's position of international IMF, our international investors. That's why it's so important, because if someday you will let it go and forget about it. She already retired person, nobody care. All other reformers who now making reforms will understand that they will, when they left job, when they lost their security, high level of security of the people who are servant of the people, they could be attacked by any oligarchs. And they understand that every day making reforms, they have critical connections with oligarchs, fighting with oligarchs. And if they follow the state interest, they will have a very bad relation with the oligarchs. And all other reforms will understand if they could do it with Valeria Gontareva, who one of the top reforms, that could do it with anybody else.
What I'm concerned about is that Gontareva, she right now she does a research work at London School of Economics, which means she talks to investment community of London, to local businesses, and London is like an investment hub for Europe, for emerging markets, and therefore Ukraine gets an image of being a highly violent and political and stable country. And now Gontareva will probably pay a visit. She was invited by the US Senate to witness on what was done to her in London and then to her relatives here in Kiev, all this violence. And Ukraine is expecting US Congress to vote on sanctions against Russia. Ukraine is expecting European Union to vote on sanctions against Russia. And now all these people are getting a message that Ukraine's top reformer, which has done more to the banking sector than all the previous central bank governors, she's been oppressed, and she is she might be considered an asylum, which is, you know, it means that the situation is critical. No one will be willing to take any kind of important government job and push for this complicated reforms anymore if they look at what is being done to Gontareva. So it's very important for Ukraine's police and prosecutors to investigate the case unless they want to get one more case which will be remembered by politicians in the West and investment community and will be brought up each time the discussion goes about rule of law in Ukraine. So it's very important. I wouldn't underestimate the Gontareva case. It's very, very important.
Dmytro, of course, you do not represent law enforcement investigations. However, as a chairman of the Committee of the Economy, what do you think you and the MPs should do in order to, to improve the situation, the image, or at least show that some of the things are just unacceptable, and, apart from the regrets, you still have the legislation, you still can, quite be, creative and inventive in order to prove otherwise.
Any proposals?
That's up to you. That's what we're expecting.
Well, I think it would be fair to say that even the servant of the people as a party is not very homogeneous. It's a representation of people with different views and different aspects, including the economic reforms of Ms. Gontareva. What we are united about is the state interest, and the state interest and the image of Ukraine, which might be damaged by this case, is of course of great importance. But this kind of damage is also influenced by the personality of Ms. Gontareva and by the results of her reforms. And I'm not sure we might find a single and a unified position within the party. That's basically a pool for debates. For example, if you take the Crimean case and the elections on the 8th of September on the territory of Crimea, Sevastopol and Simferopol, the Verkhovna Rada has been united into sending this message that we're against it because that's a level of national interest that nobody agrees about. But then when you have any kind of decisions that are rather personal and are taken from different points of view, then you have different opinions. And I definitely will consider your proposition and think about it and be creative. Maybe we'll have an internal discussion about this. But as of today, I'm not sure we're having any kind of idea.
And from you to rounding up this discussion, which is a bit broader, it's not just about this week events. What would you expect from the Economic Committee of Rada, which would be the sign to ensure that Mr. Kolomoisky doesn't have his strong grip over the Ukrainian economy or an insecurity of the national bank.
I don't see that economy.
I know, because we can't address sometimes. We're not talking to Mr. Kolomoisky.
When we're talking about Rada, for instance, I would be happy to not see when Kolomoisky is saying something in an interview and it became a law in 2 weeks. I don't want to see such things. I don't want to see that.
If it's super good law.
Yes, Kolomoisky is a guy who presents super good ideas
Not
for
in 2 weeks, I beg you.
Okay, 3 weeks. I do not want to see that Mr. Kolomoisky can control state-owned enterprise like in old good times and get a benefit from it, and everybody is happy. I can't agree with it. And I think Rada should also, people in Rada, you AMP of several people who used to say that Poroshenko is corrupt guy, and his friend Kononenko was like a guy who controls Centroenergo. I think it's completely the same story, but now another K controls. You see the K in some movies. There's a different K who controls the same situation. I don't want Ukrainians to accept it as a normal situation. It's unnormal, and they should focus on it. They should tell to the president, guys, it's not okay when oligarchs take a benefit from state-owned enterprise.
And Ivan, for the final comment for our audience, what would you suggest to watch out in the whole case, in particular of the Privat Bank? Well, because it's quite getting a bit complex, so where people should watch?
There is one very important indicator of what's going to be done to Privat Bank and other state-owned banks. They're about to get new supervisory boards, which control their management, which control their financial situation. And Alexander Dubinsky, an MP with Servant of the People Party, who is believed to be Kolomoisky's man, will be in charge of commission that puts these supervisory boards on place. And this is a risk, because we need to have very transparent and experienced people in finance who work for the state-owned banks, for the Privat Bank. And if we see more Kolomoisky people in this process, if we see Kolomoisky people in the supervisory board of Privat Bank, then it's a very bad sign. So let's follow what's going on with Privat Bank and state-owned banks in terms of supervisory boards.
If I could hop on Sergey's argument, which I completely agree with, in fact...
And would you maybe respond or to
Yeah, absolutely. We are, in fact, being cancelling a list of state-owned enterprises that cannot be privatized. And this is the first step of a very important reform on privatization, corporatization of state-owned enterprises. A lot of them, all of them, or most of them are inefficient. And we want the state to be managed adequately and to be administered adequately as well, and to be efficient. The second thing, we canceled the commission for privatization, and we are transferring this function to the committee and to the executive. Then we're having this concession law, which allows not only to privatize or to lease, but also to invest money into an object of infrastructure, such as a port or a road, that are being transferred for the management to an international investor who can attract not only money, but best practices in management and other things. What Sergey, I beg your pardon, Ivan said, is of course important as well. I didn't take part in the appointment of any kind of officials to any kind of commissions, but I think that they're having an internal discussion within the financial committee. I'm not sure about the arguments of pro and contra of that discussion. I will look into it. But I think that there's been an election, and this guy has been elected, and hopefully he will do a good job. If not, he will just be removed from that place and change. That's pretty much it.